Republican senators are expected to take control of the Senate floor this week as part of a push to impose nationwide restrictions on voter registration. All this comes as Senate Majority Leader John Thune faces growing pressure from President Trump and the base of his party to push through the voting reform bill titled the Save America Act. Here to break down what he's hearing is The Hill's senior staff writer, Alexander Bolton. Hey, Alex. So it seems like Leader Thune is walking a tightrope here. He says he doesn't have the votes to pass this bill, but he wants to placate President Trump and Republicans who have made this issue number one. At the end of the day, is Thune embarking on what is essentially a giant waste of time here? How is this going to play out on the Senate floor?
Well, really what we're seeing is Senate Majority Leader John Thune appeasing Trump and the right-wing base who have made this Save America Act their number one legislative priority. It has no chance of passing, and that is something that even Republicans like Tom Tillis and Lisa Murkowski acknowledge. This is not going to pass. It does not have the 60 votes it needs. Not a single Democrat will vote for it. So this is all about putting on a good show for the president. And I spoke with Mike Lee, the Republican from Utah, who is spearheading this effort. And he says the president's going to be watching this closely, and his level of satisfaction with what happens in the Senate is going to be based on how much effort Republicans put in debating this bill. Now, the question is, how long does this tie up the floor? Does it tie it up for a week? Does it tie it up for 2 weeks? Mike Lee, who's the lead proponent, is comparing this legislation to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which he pointed out spent 60 days on the floor. His idea is that the longer it spends on the floor, the more you can build up political momentum and support for the legislation. But it's very clear after speaking with Chuck Schumer over the weekend that Democrats are adamantly opposed to this piece of legislation.
Yeah, Senator Lee is making the case that he can sort of build pressure as they hold the floor on this issue. Is there any world in which that happens, that extreme pressure from the president and the base of the party causes people to change their mind? It seems to have worked on Senator John Cornyn, a longtime proponent of the filibuster, now changing his mind. What other Republicans are they targeting to try to flip here?
Well, there are a number of Republicans who do not support the talking filibuster, such as members of the GOP leadership, Senate Republican Whip John Barrasso, Lindsey Graham, who is a close ally of the president, but he does not support the talking filibuster because he feels that would turn the Senate into the House if you were to nuke, quote unquote, the filibuster, if you were to basically turn it into a majoritarian type institution. There are other Republicans as well. Jerry Moran of Kansas is someone I've spoken to, does not support this. I don't think any members of Thune's leadership team is actively backing the talking filibuster. So, and that's out of deference to the leader. Now, the question, I think, is whether Mike Lee can bring enough attention to this issue while it's on the floor from the president and also from rank and file Republican voters that there's going to be such intense pressure on Republicans to flip and support the talking filibuster. But keep in mind, you need 51 Republican votes. You need the overwhelming majority of the conference to table all the amendments that would come up during a talking filibuster. So to flip that many Republican votes to actually launch and deploy the talking filibuster as Lee and Trump wants is very unlikely.
As of now, it appears no Democrats will support the SAVE Act, not even John Fetterman, who has been siding with Republicans quite frequently as of late. Is there a danger in that for Democrats? I mean, the notion that people should have to show ID to vote and that they have to be citizens to vote, those issues usually poll pretty well.
That's true. Voter ID in particular is a very popular proposal. It has something like 80% support. And Republicans have pointed to polling showing that 71% of Americans support the SAVE Act. But this is one of those issues. While it's broadly popular to require voters to present IDs when they vote, it's not an issue that really motivates voters to get out to the polls. And what it really does motivate is Democratic interest groups. You could call them like the there are NAACP, for instance, Democracy Docket, and others who, argue that if you were to have these voter ID requirements, you'd be disenfranchising tens of millions of Americans. And that's because one of the provisions of the SAVE Act is requiring documented proof of citizenship, requiring people to show either birth certificates or passports to register to vote. And there are millions of Americans who just don't have access to those documents. And they argue that it's essentially unconstitutional to block people from voting because of that. And they're equating this or comparing this to a poll tax, something that's been used in the past to disenfranchise voters. The other issue here is the restrictions on mail-in balloting. There is a language in the Republican bill that would require photocopies of identification when requesting a ballot or when submitting a ballot. That raises all sorts of questions as well. And that was something that Mark Elias, the lead Democratic election lawyer, pointed out on a conference call over the weekend. Said that requiring photocopies of IDs, will certainly trigger all sorts of fights as to what's acceptable, what's not, and in the end, will make absentee voting largely impractical and do away with it. So there's some very big issues at stake here. Chuck Schumer called it a dagger to the heart of democracy. Democrats are taking this as a serious threat to their ability to turn out voters, not just in this election, but in future elections.
I wonder, Democrats might not say this out loud, but are they going to be happy for Republicans to hold the floor for weeks on end, mostly fighting with each other for a bill that won't pass and doesn't really get at the issue voters say is most important to them, which is affordability?
I'm sure Democrats are happy to have this fight. They feel that they're completely unified on it, and they're just going to portray it as an effort to disenfranchise voters, particularly minority voters, tribal voters. And I'll point out that there's more Democratic unity against this bill than there is Republican unity for this bill. Tom Tillis, whom I mentioned before, he suggested last week that he wouldn't vote to get on the bill because he feels it's just a messaging exercise. Even though he is a co-sponsor of the bill, he feels that this is just a big political stunt that's going to suck up floor time. And then you have Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who she represents many Native American voters, indigenous voters in Alaska who would be disenfranchised. And they are a key part of her constituency. She's not going to support this either, I don't think. So the question is, how long can Republicans really drag this floor fight out? Now, as I mentioned, Mike Lee wants to make this like a civil rights crusade from the 60s. I mean, he wants to spend a lot of time on it. But I suspect that John Thune, the Republican leader, is going to bring this to a conclusion so it can move on to other business, such as confirmation of Markwayne Mullin to become next Secretary of Homeland Security. I think Republicans are also hoping to get a deal to reopen the Homeland Security Department before the Easter recess, which starts March 28th. There's marketing reform, there's permitting reform. There are a variety of things that Thune wants to do that has a much better chance of getting done. So I think it'll be interesting to see just how much latitude he gives Trump's allies to occupy floor time with this bill.
What do you think we should be keeping an eye on this week as this whole situation plays out in the Senate that will give us an indication of kind of what direction it's going?
I think the real question is, how involved is the president going to get? If Trump is sending out truth social posts throughout this debate and urging Republicans to employ the talking filibuster or to fight harder, I think it's going to be difficult then for the GOP leadership to pivot onto something else, especially if there isn't something pressing like a deal to reopen the Homeland Security Department. And even Markwayne Mullin, he's on the executive calendar, so they could pivot from the legislative calendar to confirm Mullin, for example, and go right back to the SAVE Act debate. But the bottom line is, and this is something Thune himself has said, this bill has no chance of becoming law, according to him, and I think he's right about that. So then, how much time do you really want to spend on the Senate floor? Thune likes to say, Senate floor time is the coin of the realm. It's the most valuable thing he has as majority leader. So is he really? How much of it does he really want to spend on what's essentially a political show debate?
All right, story will continue to follow. For now, we'll leave it at that. Alexander Bolton, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on.